Hello everyone, and welcome to another video about self-driving cars and the social nature of traffic. I'm Eric Winkhuizen. I used to work in the self-driving car industry as a social scientist, and it was while I researched self-driving cars that I became convinced that self-driving cars simply should not be on the road without direct human supervision. In my experience, self-driving car engineers just stare at me blankly when I say traffic is social. So I always try to demonstrate what I mean by analyzing actual instances of driving in some detail and point out the social. It turns out that a lot of our driving practices are unconscious. So people develop some fantastical ideas captured in slogans like humans are terrible drivers or I don't trust anybody on the road, etc. People are not at all perfect, but they are a lot more capable than self-driving cars. In my podcast on self-driving car perception, I argued that the most amazing thing about human perception is not that people can see much better than autonomous vehicles, although that is also true, but that people, despite having different biology, mostly see the same things in the same situation. That is, that perception is really a social practice. And while autonomous vehicle perception is an amazing technical feat, it is the fact that self-driving cars can't see what people see, and that people can't trust what autonomous vehicles see, that makes them so dangerous. In today's podcast, I will show how self-driving cars cannot interact. Since self-driving cars are not social, that should come as no surprise. But the consequences are profound and an absolute deal breaker. If you can't interact, you should not be driving on the road. Now, the word interact needs a little clarification. You could say that people on the road interact all the time. For instance, when I drive down the highway and the car in front of me slows down, I will slow down too. That is a kind of interaction, but not the kind I mean. The interactions I will be talking about in this podcast are sequences of actions between two specific agents on the road, where the actions by each party is specifically communicative to the other. Here are just some examples from my friend Terry Kavanagh, who is a cabbie in London. Those are the kind of interactions self-driving cars cannot do. Here's a very recent clip from a ride recorded by Waymo customer Kevin Chen in San Francisco.
And my goal with this ride is just going to go around Chinatown and North Beach, and should be some pretty interesting scenarios at this time, which is like 4 p.m. on a Friday. Oh, it's a little brake tap for that person. He's letting us go, but of course, like, Waymo does not understand hand gestures, so.
When the clip starts, there are two men running across the crosswalk and then up the sidewalk. One of them steps between two parked cars and walks towards the street. The Waymo approaches and slams on the brake. The pedestrian stops and turns towards the robotaxi, and he makes a hand gesture. The Waymo does not move. The pedestrian steps back between the cars and makes a second, similar hand gesture. The Waymo still does not move. The pedestrian stares at the Waymo, and the car behind the Waymo honks. And then the Waymo slowly rolls forward and proceeds. But let me point out a few things that go beyond this simple description. First, when the robotaxi starts braking, the passenger says, "A little brake tap for that person." How does the passenger know that the Waymo tapped the brakes for the pedestrian? Well, when people notice unexpected actions on the street, they cannot help but think about what may have caused that action. In this case, the passenger needs an explanation for the sudden brake by the Waymo, which has an open road ahead of it. The only thing that makes sense, given the situation, is that it is stopping for the pedestrian. The suddenness of the braking is matched with the sudden appearance of the pedestrian from between the two cars and moving towards the street. I too think that the car brakes for the person. So when the passenger says, "that person," I understand that to refer to the man with the shorts and the blue t-shirt. I really do hope you see it this way as well. Moreover, it is obvious that not only Kevin, the passenger of the Waymo, and I, and hopefully you, but also the blue t-shirt guy thinks that the Waymo is stopping for him. We know that because the blue t-shirt guy turns towards the Waymo and gestures for the Waymo to go. It was not his intention to run out in front of the Waymo, he just wants to get into his car. And the Waymo has the right of way and should go, and he will get into his car after it has passed, although hopefully soon, as he is in a hurry. So Kevin and the blue t-shirt guy have both concluded that the robotaxi stopped for him. They have understood the situation in the same way. From that intersubjective understanding, the pedestrian's gesture can only be seen as an invitation for the Waymo to go. Note that this gesture may be a typical one to let someone go ahead, but it is the context of time, just after the Waymo slammed on the brake, and the context of the situation, a pedestrian who is trying to get into his car, that gives this gesture such a clear meaning. As Kevin puts it, he's letting us go. But the Waymo does not move. This is confusing for the pedestrian. The robotaxi had clearly stopped for him, but it did not need to, and now that he gestures for it to go, why does it not move? A moment later, the pedestrian steps back further and gestures once more, making the invitation more emphatic. But still, the Waymo does not move. Really odd. Clearly, the driver of the car behind the robotaxi also thinks so because she honks. And a moment later, the Waymo does start to drive, although it is of course unlikely that the honk had anything to do with it. When the standoff is over, Kevin, the Waymo passenger, comments, "Waymo does not understand hand gestures." Indeed, it doesn't. After some 15 years of autonomous vehicle development and billions of dollars of investment, producing a self-driving car that has the ability to interact with humans remains elusive. Self-driving cars are incapable of interaction. Indeed, the Waymo was blissfully unaware that it was even part of an interaction. The industry did try to make autonomous vehicles that interact. I was part of that effort when I worked at Nissan. But we failed because, in a nutshell, in order to interact, you need to be aware of other people as well as your own actions. And self-driving cars aren't aware of anything because they just execute a program uploaded into their computer. So interaction is just not something self-driving cars can do. It is a principled limitation. Which means that the robotaxi industry that is now testing cars without human safety drivers essentially believes that their software drivers do not need to be able to interact. The industry has decided that it is perfectly fine for their robotaxis to drive around and not recognize when people are trying to interact with it, let alone be able to respond. The industry hopes that because a self-driving car will follow the rules of the road, be programmed to be conservative, they will be perfectly safe without the ability to interact. Just as everybody in this example is perfectly safe. What I suspect happened in this instance is that the Waymo first stopped because it predicted that the pedestrian was going to step out in front of it. Then, when the pedestrian does not cross but stays put, the algorithm no longer predicts that the pedestrian will cross and starts to go. The robotaxi's actions are not at all based on an interaction with the pedestrian, as we could see. I think the industry is very wrong to try and drive a vehicle on our roads without the ability to interact, for a number of reasons. To understand that, it is important to think about when interactions occur. And it turns out they occur mostly when there is some kind of trouble. To illustrate that, let's go back and look at one more detail of the example we just looked at. As soon as the blue shirt guy notices the Waymo, he slows down and stops before entering the street. As he does so, he notices that the robotaxi is also slowing down for him. These two actions, him stopping for the Waymo to go and the Waymo stopping to let him go, are not aligned. Obviously, when one party stops, the other should go and not stop also. So there's a misalignment between the two road users, and you can see what the pedestrian does quite automatically. He starts an interaction to solve the problem. Interactions are the social practice par excellence to fix troubles on the road. So if you are incapable of recognizing that there is misalignment of actions and also incapable of interacting to resolve the trouble like an autonomous vehicle, you do not possess some very fundamental skills all humans use and rely upon when driving. These skills may not be in the DMV handbook, but we certainly assume that everybody on the road knows how to interact. One more point. I said that the autonomous vehicle industry thinks that by driving slowly and conservatively they can get away with having a car that cannot interact. But driving slowly and conservatively yourself does not automatically mean you won't get into situations that require interaction, as this example shows. When others start an interaction, you are part of it, like it or not. Aside from resolving mundane problems of order, as in the last example, interactions are also used when there are special road situations. Take this instance of a problem when a Waymo encounters a crew working on the road. Obviously, the workers assume that the car can understand hand gestures. They assume that even though it is a robotaxi, if it drives on the public roads, it must be able to communicate. But that is not the case. So instead of turning right before the middle of the intersection where the work is taking place, as the workers urge it to do, the car veers left instead, and then tries to make a right turn, but can't, and gets stuck. Support must be called as the car blocks traffic. The passenger, who does not say anything at all ride long, now cannot suppress the urge to yell at the Waymo to go. It's very uncomfortable. He, like the road workers, tries to interact with the Waymo in vain. Obviously, the whole scene could have been avoided had the Waymo been able to interact. And now you can see why the San Francisco Police Department and the Fire Department have complained so much about self-driving cars. The robo-taxis cannot respond to their urgent interactions in emergency situations. Here are some examples that I will play without commentary as I have analyzed them in previous podcasts.
Which means we're supposed to go through this stop sign. But because no one was behind me and because I'm an idiot, I decided to let the beta do its thing and not intervene.
Yeah, it's gonna mess up the rescue. But if I pop a flare, what do you think? I'm curious.
Think it'll recognize that?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Leave hella smoke in the front. No, you stay.
Another problem with having a driver on the road incapable of interaction is that for people, interaction is such a basic capability that they can't conceive of a driver that can't do it. So that even when an autonomous vehicle is not interacting, they think it is. Consider this encounter between a pedestrian in Chinatown and a Waymo robotaxi. When the pedestrian finally reaches the edge of the curb, the pedestrian looks at the Waymo and talks to it while staying put. The Waymo does not move. Then he raises his hand and crosses. The pedestrian believes he has had an interaction with the Waymo, and that the interaction went something like this. He offered the car to go ahead. The car said, "No, you go ahead." It made a counteroffer, which he accepts by starting to walk and raising his hand to thank the self-driving car. But that is not at all what happened. The car, for whatever reason, just stays put. Therefore, the man crosses with a false sense of safety. There was no intersubjectivity, even though he assumed there was. Just like the blue t-shirt guy in the first clip thought that the Waymo stopped for him, and in actuality, the Waymo just stopped to avoid an accident without making an offer at all. There was no interactive component to the stopping action, even though the blue t-shirt guy thought there was. The fact that people cannot help but think that robotaxis are interacting with them, that the robotaxis are letting them go, for instance, is potentially quite dangerous, because interactions can trump the rules of the road. Take this example of an interaction between a pedestrian and a Tesla on full self-driving in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
And boom. So we slam on the brakes there. It did seem like wow, that person ran a red light. I disengaged there because the car started to move forward a little bit. It did seem like he was going to walk out in front of us, and that's what I thought as well.
As the car approaches the intersection with the traffic light, there is a young man approaching the sidewalk. He seems totally focused on his phone and does not look at the oncoming vehicles. This does not mean, of course, that he will just cross without looking. People aren't crazy. That said, it is a concern, and as a human driver you would probably pay special attention to him. You might even slow down. Tesla's full self-driving software is not bothered and keeps going at the 25 mph speed limit. Then the traffic light turns yellow, just as the pedestrian slows down as he approaches the curb. Half a second after the light turned yellow, the representation of the traffic light on the screen in the Tesla also turns yellow. Another half a second later, and FSD slams on the brake aggressively. You can hear things slide forward inside the car.
And boom. So we slam on the brakes there.
This strong deceleration is noticed by the pedestrian, who takes it to have been for him, as constituting an offer for him to cross, and he immediately responds by starting to walk. As he begins to walk, he looks at the pedestrian traffic light ahead and must notice that it is still red, and yet he continues to go. Such is the social power of an invitation. Invitations ought to be accepted. But just then, the Tesla starts to roll forward. Heaven knows why. Again, we can see trouble. In this case, both parties start to go. That too does not work. So immediately the driver takes control from FSD and steps on the brake. The pedestrian, undoubtedly taken aback, stops too and looks at the Tesla. And again we have two misaligned actions. Both are now not going. And immediately we can see what the driver of the Tesla turns to: interaction. He raises his hand to the pedestrian in both an apology and a renewal of the invitation to let the pedestrian go. And right away the pedestrian waves at the Tesla driver and confidently steps into the street, even though at that point still the pedestrian light is still red. This example illustrates how interactions are powerful in that they allow road users to agree on travel orders even when these are in violation of the rules of the road. In this case in Ann Arbor, the pedestrian believed the Tesla made an offer and immediately started going, even though the light was still red. In conclusion, autonomous vehicles cannot engage in social interaction. It is a principled limitation. It won't be fixed in version 12 or whatever. Yet somehow the self-driving car industry and regulators are okay with this. But empirically, social interaction is the practice that people unconsciously and automatically turn to when there is trouble on the road. From relatively small troubles of who should go before whom, to potentially life-threatening troubles when police and firefighters are dealing with an emergency, interaction is our tool to keep each other safe. The idea that we can just put software drivers on the road that cannot interact with human road users is simply madness. It cannot be condoned.